a declaration of the rights of the inhabitants of the Commonwealth or State of Pennsylvania, that all men are born equally free and independent, and have certain natural, inherent, and inalienable rights, among which are the enjoying and defending life and liberty, acquiring, possessing, and protecting property, and pursuing and obtaining happiness and safety. That all men have a natural and unalienable right to worship Almighty God according to the dictates of their own conscience and understanding, and that no man ought or of right can be compelled to attend any religious worship, or erect or support any place of worship, or maintain any ministry contrary to or against his own free will and consent. Nor can any man who acknowledges the being of a God be justly deprived or abridged of any civil right as a citizen, on account of his religious sentiments or particular mode of religious worship, and that no authority can or ought to be vested in or assumed by any power whatever that shall in any case interfere with, or in any manner of control, the right of conscience in the free exercise of religious worship. That the people of this state have the sole, exclusive, and inherent right of governing and regulating the internal police of the same. That all power, being originally inherent in, and consequently derived from the people, therefore all officers of government, whether legislative or executive, are their trustees and servants, and at all times accountable to them. That government is, or ought to be, instituted for the common benefit, protection, and security of the people, nation, or community, and not for the particular emolument or advantage of any single man, family, or soft of men who are a part only of that community, and that the community hath an indubitable, unalienable, and indefeasible right to reform, alter, or abolish government in such manner as shall be by that community judged most conducive to the public will. That those who are employed in the legislative and executive business of the state may be restrained from oppression. The people have a right, at such periods as they may think proper, to reduce their public officers to a private station, and supply the vacancies by certain and regular elections. That all elections ought to be free, and that all free men, having a sufficient evident common interest with, an attachment to the community, have a right to elect officers or to be elected into office. That every member of society hath the right to be protected in the enjoyment of life, liberty, and property, and therefore is bound to contribute his proportion towards the expense of that protection, and yield his personal service when necessary, or an equivalent thereto. But no part of a man's property can be justly taken from him or applied to public uses without his own consent or that of his legal representatives. Nor can any man who is conscientiously scrupulous of bearing arms be justly compelled thereto, if he will pay such equivalent, nor are the people bound by any laws, but such as they have in like manner assented to for the common good. Then in all prosecutions for criminal offenses, a man hath the right to be heard by himself and his counsel, to man the cause and the nature of his accusation, to be confronted with the witnesses, to call for evidence in his favor, and a speedy public trial, by an impartial jury of the country, without the unanimous consent of which jury he cannot be found guilty, nor can he be compelled to give evidence against himself, nor can any man be justly deprived of his liberty, except by the laws of the land or the judgment of his peers. That the people have a right to hold themselves, their houses, papers, and possessions free from search and seizure, and therefore warrants without oaths or affirmations first made, according as sufficient foundation for them, and whereby any officer or messenger may be commanded or required to search suspected places, or to seize any person or persons, his or their property, not particularly described, are contrary to that right, and ought not to be granted. That in controversies respecting property, and in suits between man and man, the parties have a right to trial by jury, which ought to be held sacred. That the people have a right to freedom of speech, and of writing, and publishing their sentiments. Therefore, the freedom of the press ought not to be restrained. that the people have a right to bear arms for the defense of themselves and the state. And as standing armies in the time of peace are dangerous to liberty, they ought not to be kept up, and that the military should be kept under strict subordination to, and governed by, the civil power. That a frequent recurrence to fundamental principles, and a firm adherence to justice, moderation, temperance, industry, and frugality are absolutely necessary to preserve the blessings of liberty and keep a government free. The people ought, therefore, to pay particular attention to those points in the choice of officers and representatives, and have a right to exact a due and constant regard to them from their legislatures and magistrates, in the making and executing such laws as are necessary for the good government of the state. That all men have a natural inherent right to emigrate from one state to another that will receive them, or to form a new state in vacant countries, or in such countries that they can purchase, whenever they think that thereby they can promote their own happiness. That the people have a right to assemble together, to consult for their common good, to instruct the representatives, and to apply to the legislature for redress of grievances, by address, petition, or remonstrance. Ratified by the Pennsylvania Constitutional Convention on September 28, 1776. Drafted by Robert Whitehill, Timothy Matlack, Thomas Young, George Bryan, James Cannon, and Benjamin Franklin.